Right, okay.
Sir Joseph Banks and the question of hemp.
Alright.
And quite frankly, I'm excited, I really am, because I'm here next to this illustrious author. Illustrious? No. I'm excited because I'm here next to this illustrious author. Not many books have been written on the hemp history in Australia, really, has it, John? I mean, this is
well,
very
yeah, no,
unusual.
I'm about the only person who writes about cannabis history in Australia, so I'd have to agree with you on that. There are several books which plagiarise me extensively, but generally speaking, I'm the main source. Well, Jackaroo, in his history of cannabis, he actually looks at, he does a very good history on hemp during the first years of the American Republic. And where that's coming from is another book which he'd read, which was called something like Hemp, Russia, America, Napoleon.
Right.
Now it's some combination of those four words. Now I never am quite sure which particular combination it is, but that's the book he's relying on, and that's the book I rely on quite a lot for the sort of the end of the history of Sir Joseph Banks and the question of hemp. So I knew Jack had actually hadn't done all the archival work, which is what historians do. What historians do is we go to all these different archives and we look around for documents, and governments have to release their archives after about 30 years after, effectively it's too late for people to be worried about, or people to object to what they've been doing. They can get away with it. They've got away with it for 30 years, therefore they'll let you know what they've got away with for 30 years. And so there's the files you want to look at, or there's what historians like looking at. And with Sir Joseph Banks and the question of hemp, I've had discovered certain files that Sir Joseph Banks had on hemp, and they were the ones I was interested
So
in.
how did you discover these files? I mean, that's very interesting, because it's something very obscure, isn't it? It would have been hidden away.
Well, I found a reference in a book called Sir Joseph Banks, Father of Australia, by Joseph Maiden. Joseph Maiden was New South Wales botanist around about 1900, and he in fact organises some of the early hemp experiments in New South Wales. He sort of does this, he gets about 600 farmers in New South Wales which he supplies hemp seed to, so he does this big sort of hemp growing experiment in New South Wales. He's head of it. Later on he writes a book called Sir Joseph Banks, Father of Australia, and while reading Sir Joseph Banks, Father of Australia, I discovered that Banks has this file in the Kew archives called Hemp 1764 to 1809, and that's the file which I go looking for, and that's the file which is a large part of Sir Joseph Banks and the question of hemp.
So the secret is unfolding, viewers.
Yeah.
Alright, so do you want to tell us some secret stuff that we may not know about New South Wales and the origins of hemp and cannabis?
Yeah, well, the origins of New South Wales are tied up with the idea that it will be a hemp colony. And to understand the idea of a hemp colony, you have to understand that at that time in history, we were in what was called the Age of Sail. And the great triumph of the Age of Sail is that we're able to sort of get around the world, so you can navigate the world, discover all these different places and begin trades with them. And that age goes from about 1500 to around about 1810. 1810, the age of steam starting to take off. And after the age of steam, we have the age of oil. So we've got three basic technological eras during that period. And in sail, hemp is as important in the age of sail as oil is in the age of oil. We're talking about the naval empires, and part of this the subtitle of Sir Joseph Banks and the question of hemp is Hemp, Sea Power and Empire. And it's based on a geostrategic theory of a guy called Admiral Mahan, who was an American admiral, and he argued that the basis of empire is sea power, and he writes a very large series of books, you know, arguing that case, looking at sea power in various eras. And so from the times of, say, the Punic Wars, which is the name for the wars between Carthage and Rome,
Right.
which happened around about 300 BC, from about that time onwards, he argues, world empires have been based on sea power, and that's the way it more or less goes until, you know, the Second World War, when, you know, planes take over.
Well, see, now the one thing I was reading, which I thought was very interesting, John, was that the word cannabis, no, backtrack, was that the word canvas is related to the word cannabis. So it's the Dutch or Latin equivalent. It's related etymologically to the word cannabis, and canvas refers to the sails of the boats on the ships. So basically, the might of the empire really was a story about hemp, because without hemp, which would then last up to a month or more, they didn't have to repair their ropes as often, they didn't have to repair their sails, so they could do cross-ocean journeying.
Yeah, well, the basic story is that, every 2 years all the hempen sails and hempen rope would be worn out, they'd be sort of blown away in storms, etc. So you had to replace the amount of, you had to replace the hempen sails and the hempen rope every 2 years. So they had magazines where they stored large quantities of hemp, etc. And that's what they did. Yeah, so hemp was important for that reason. And if you could cut hemp supplies, it meant that the British Navy didn't have sails and didn't have rope. And they had really nice ships and everything, and really nice sailors and really nice guns, but they couldn't manoeuvre, they were just sitting ducks and they couldn't go anywhere. So if you could actually do that, cut hemp supplies, you could defeat the British Navy. And the British Navy is the biggest navy in Europe at that time, and there's a real fight going on to become the hegemon, the sort of dominant empire in Europe at that time between France and England, and maintaining that particular advantage for the British meant that they couldn't be invaded. So as long as they have the navy, they can't be invaded, they can invade everyone else. And generally what they do, the British policy has always been to start wars on the continent, get other people fighting each other and snaffle their colonies, you know, while these sort of wars going on in Europe. So that's how the British Empire gets built, through that sort of simple strategy of starting all these wars in Europe and getting all these people killed, and meanwhile you just steal the colonies. Somewhere
along the journey, the British people, or the British Empire, did not have access to enough hemp from Europe. So they kind of looked towards America to be their colony.
You need to know a bit about the the story of cannabis. Where does cannabis come from? Where is the homeland of cannabis?
Right. Well, you're going to tell us, isn't he? He's going to tell us.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you where. The homeland of cannabis is in that part of Asia where India sort of smashes into Asia about 40 million years ago.
Right.
And as it gradually moves north, it forces up the Tibetan highland. So what comes to dominate Eurasia, that large continent, the largest continent in the world, is there's a big central plateau which is Tibet, and then it has large amounts of sort of water because it's a glaciers and snow for most of the time, and particularly before the interglacial begins about 11,000 years ago, during the last ice age maximum. There were sort of huge glaciers there. So there's lots of water, lots of fresh water on really high bits of ground, so all these rivers radiate from there, and they radiate through the rest of Asia. You have a whole series of rivers which flow through China, the Yangtze, etc., the Yellow River, and all those. You have the Mekong and the rivers of Indochina. You have the Brahmaputra and the Ganges. In India you have the Indus. Then you have the Russian rivers like the Oxus and
so people are colonising and they're spreading the herb around that way?
No. That's, cannabis just spreads naturally because it's in this part of the world, which is, it's the centre of the drainage pattern of Eurasia. Right. And cannabis spreads pretty well naturally down river basins. It's sort of carried by floods, etc. And so cannabis then sort of goes down to these various sort of huge river systems like the Ob and the Yangtze and the Indus and the Ganges and the Mekong, etc. And what causes species is time and distance.
What causes what?
Species or specification is time and distance. It's bioregions. Certain bioregions are isolated from other bioregions, and something like Tibet, which is this huge plateau, 12,000 feet high, effectively acts as a really huge barrier in Asia, and you have these number of different sort of bioregions, and the cannabis species develops different properties in these different sort of areas. So, cannabis starts off probably somewhere in Tibet, and it's domesticated twice. There are two domesticated cannabis species. There's Cannabis sativa, which is a hemp plant, which is fibre hemp, and there's drug cannabis, which is Cannabis indica, which the Americans call marijuana, which is a word I try and avoid using because it's the word whereby cannabis is defamed, slandered, and they start a war against it. So I don't like using the marijuana word, and I prefer using the word Cannabis indica, which is what drug cannabis was called before that. Before that. Well, it was called Cannabis indica. It wasn't called cannabis. Because I knew that hemp didn't have those properties. So you have one species of cannabis, a southern species, which gets developed by people as a drug plant, and that's, several thousand years ago. Like, the cannabis plants have been domesticated for longer than most species. Like they're some of humanity's earliest domesticates. And the hemp species has been domesticated for something, I think 8,000 years at least. So they're very old species, one of which is a fibre plant, and that's the one which expands into Europe. And it's in the Mediterranean about a couple of hundred years BC, and it's been used in rope in and sail in the Mediterranean. Reaches Britain about 400 AD, and then as the European empires start to take over the world, they need hemp, because hemp is the basis of the age of sail, and sail is the basis of empires. It is the basis of empire, so they need to have hemp everywhere. So the Spanish sort of start growing a lot of hemp in the New World. They start growing it in Chile about 1543, I think, given as a date for that. The British start growing it in North America. There's some arguments that hemp was already in North America when the British colonists reached their 1600, and some people say the Vikings brought it over in 1000 AD. So there's a question about that, but so hemp spreads with the naval empires, with the European empires from about 1500 onwards, and it spreads to all the colonies because they need to have places where they can repair their ships and re-outfit their ships.
Before we just jump to that Australian topic,
Mm.
so my understanding is that the British Empire had its hemp supplies primarily from the New World, which is America. And then America says we're now independent, and we're no longer giving you our hemp supplies. So, correct me if I'm wrong, but that puts Britain in a real predicament. Oh my God, where are we going to get our hemp sales from? But luckily, just around the corner, we've just discovered New South Wales.
Yeah, more or less like that. I suppose what I should say, I was explaining before about, hemp comes from Eurasia, Central Eurasia, and most of Britain's hemp supplies are coming from Russia because Russia's moved into that homeland of cannabis, and they're the ones who are exporting the hemp to Russia, hemp to Britain. So most of British hemp comes from the Baltic. So America is developed as the first hemp colony. So that's for Britain, and that's a really important part of British imperial policy in North America, is to make sure that everyone grows hemp. So they have laws in most of the states in North America, all the colonies, to begin with, that you have to grow hemp. It's part of your form of taxation. So they developed North America, their North American colonies, as hemp colonies, as an alternative source for hemp in times of war, if their supplies from Russia get kept. And then the Americans rebel, and then the British decide they're going to punish the Americans and not buy anything off them, because they're a bunch of rebels. And so they need to develop other sort of hemp colonies, and that's how they look to Australia to try and develop Australia.
Enter Australia. Hello, Aussies. All right. Aussie's the land of criminals. Not really. We should say Aussie's the land of hemp.
Well, they would have loved to have got New Zealand. New Zealand was what they were really after, because New Zealand actually has a plant called Formium Tenax, which the New Zealanders called, well, I shouldn't say flex, I should say flax.
Flax, yes, flax. Get it right.
And it's actually a form of hemp.
Flax.
Well, it's not a form of flax or hemp, but it can be used for the purposes of flax, hemp, and even the purposes of silk. And it's discovered by Sir Joseph Banks on his tour of the Pacific with Cook.
Right.
And the whole idea of the expedition of the Endeavour is often portrayed as a scientific expedition, but it is also looking at new places to build empire and new products to build empire. And Banks is very interested in hemp because it's the most important plant on the planet at this stage. And Britain has this real problem with hemp, that it's
supplies.
It's supply that comes from Russia. So it's looking for a new source, and he discovers that the Maoris have this fantastic plant which they're using for the purposes of hemp, which is to make clothing, to make sails, to make ropes, etc. And he trades with them and gets samples of their sort of rope, that he takes them back to England and tests them, and they're just phenomenally strong. They're stronger than the ropes made of the best Russian hemp. And partly the reason for this is that they're craft objects rather than manufactured objects. So you're getting Maori sort of sailors, and they're going out and they're just picking the absolute best of the Formium Tenax, one with the longest sort of leaves, etc. And they're manufacturing the absolute best rope. So they actually have better ropes than the British, and the British are just... Well, Banks is terribly impressed with this, so he decides, well, that's what we'll do. We'll colonise New Zealand. Trouble with colonising New Zealand is Maoris, and they are very warlike, and they're much more aggressive. The Aboriginal people of Australia just hid from Banks and Cook. They'd hide from them. They'd leave out presents for them and of cloth and things, and they'd very sensibly leave them there because who knows what sort of germs might be in those sort of blankets. You wouldn't want to trust the British bearing gifts.
Right.
And they don't, they just sort of run away. So it's really hard for banks and company to make contact with the Aboriginals of Australia, but they're not, their form of avoiding the Europeans is just to hide. Maori form is just to throw spears and sort of kill you and eat you and do all those unpleasant things. So they, it's regarded that New Zealand is just going to be too impossible to colonise, whereas Australia's going to be easy. So they decide to colonise Australia, and they also discover this place called Norfolk Island, which is covered in this particular plant, Formium tenax, and has very big ships. So they form the idea that they're going to colonise Norfolk Island and develop it as a basis for naval power in the Pacific. They'll be able to, they'll have these wonderfully tall trees to make masts and to make ship timbers from, and they'll have this wonderful source of cordage, which is the Formium tenax. So Banks becomes really famous, and much more famous than Cook, because Banks is a gentleman and Cook's just a sailor, and although he's a brilliant sailor, he's from the wrong class, and that matters in 18th century England, and it still matters in 21st century England. And so Banks gets a lot of fame from that, and he popularises Formium tenax, and he claims it's the most important thing they discovered on that particular trip. And why it's important is because it's going to be a new form of flax, hemp and silk. And these are all really big industries, you know.
For 13 years, Sir Joseph Banks was providing all the ships bags of hemp seeds and things like that to grow and propagate in Australia. So is he promoting this indica sativa sort of hemp thing?
Well, Banks is mainly, after Australia fails as a hemp colony, or Norfolk Island fails as a hemp colony, British need a hemp colony, so they decide India is going to be the next hemp colony. So after the US, you have Australia, then you have the attempts to make India a hemp colony. And so Banks isn't sending cannabis seeds so much to Australia as he's trying to develop a large hemp plantations, cannabis sativa plantations in India, and he sends quite a lot of hemp seeds there, but they don't, the seed doesn't survive, they just can't plant them. And the reason for that is unknown. Banks tends to think it's things like when you're on one of those wooden sailing ships and you're going from England to India, it takes you something like 8 months. There's huge waves out in the oceans, just going over you, and so he thinks they could be being spoiled by the journey. So he makes all these attempts to pack them really well so they can't get spoiled, and none of them work. He just can't get hemp seeds, cannabis sativa seeds, to grow in India. But he does make a really big effort to doing it. But I never found... there was 3 lots of hemp seeds I traced to India, and none of them was successful. They were all unsuccessful. Banks is sending all these hemp seeds to India, but they're all arriving spoiled. A couple of years later, 2 years or so later, hemp seeds come from India to Australia and are grown successfully. So
what years would we be talking about here?
1804, 1805. They start to grow a couple of acres. Well, Governor King reports on a letter he sends to Banks about 10 acres of hemp he's grown on the, I think is it the Nepean River or the Hawkesbury?
Let's have a look. So we're trying to focus on Australia, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just going to go back to this one question again, because again, I've got it fixated in my head, and perhaps it's a myth, maybe you can just clarify this again for me. So was Joseph Banks, or was he not, in your opinion, for 13 years, providing ships with bags of hemp seeds to go directly from Britain to Australia?
There are claims by other researchers that they've found cannabis sativa seeds on the inventory of the First Fleet, and I haven't checked that myself, so I don't necessarily, well, I can't necessarily confirm that, but yeah, certainly it looks like...
You cannot confirm or deny.
I can neither confirm nor deny the presence of hemp seeds on Sir Joseph Banks' ships. No, I don't know that. And the reason I say that is, you know, you can't really trust hemp enthusiasts to be very good historians. And I've heard it from a hemp enthusiast, and he may well be true, and I'm not saying he's wrong, but, you know, I'd prefer it if it came from a professional historian who could then quote me the source and I could go out and check it.
We want facts.
Well, yeah, facts I can check, so, yeah, and it would make sense that, you know, if you're going to send out them to Australia, you'd want to give them hemp seed. I'd certainly be doing it, and I think Banks would be thorough enough to do that. I think the story is, in all probability, true.
Likely.
It's very likely, and he would have... I'm sure Banks would have done it when he was outfitting the ships. He put all sorts of stuff on those ships.
So I'm envisaging an Australia 1804 going on towards the beginning of 1900s, as growing lots of hemp, good for the might of the British Empire, good for Australia. And then we went mad.
Yeah, well,
something happened. I mean, what happened? We had all this medicines, we had cannabis medications. I read somewhere that at the turn of the century, 1900, there were over 2,000 registered cannabis medicinal products in the world, of which Australia was certainly had a fair amount. By 1900.
Oh, 1900. Yes, certainly by 1900. Like, at the moment we're going through a rebirth of cannabis medicine, and that's in the period 1990 to 2010. You could talk about the second
coming.
The second coming of medicinal cannabis.
It's a painful coming, but it is coming.
In the English-speaking and European world, you remember the Indians have had it for thousands of years.
Oh, yes, yes.
But they don't matter in our view of the world. Like there tends to be a fair amount of chauvinism.
Yeah, we only care about the British colony.
Yeah.
William Shaughnessy made the first cannabis medication in 1840 something.
Yeah, William O'Shaughnessy, he's over in India, and he's working for the East India Company. He's a surgeon in Calcutta, and he's also a professor of surgery in Calcutta, and he's researching Indian medicinal plants. Like that's what, you know, as I said, that's what the Europeans did once they sort of made it to the other world. He starts researching cannabis indica, and he writes the first paper in English on cannabis as a medicine. It's called On the Preparations of the Indian Hemp, Ganja, Cannabis Indica. And he gives it the three names. He gives it the name Indian Hemp, Ganja, and Cannabis Indica.
And you're amazing for remembering that title of that book from 1849. Oh. You was only a kid when you read that.
Yeah, 1839.
1839.
I was even younger then.
Yeah, he was just a boy.
Yeah. So that's the first we get in English. And between 1840 and 1860, there is the first discovery of cannabis as a medicine in the English-speaking world, and also in the European world, because the French are also starting to explore it, and there are various French papers on it. And so cannabis is the wonder drug, it is true, of the 21st century, but it was the wonder drug of the 1850s as well.
Anyway, this is an exciting guy. I read somewhere that his journey began because he was in India working for the Crown, and a mother knocked on his door and said, "Help me, please. I've got a newborn baby and the baby's having seizures." And the seizures continued for up to 5 days, and my understanding is that he tried various medicinal tinctures available to him at the time, and on about the 5th day he eventually tried the cannabis tincture, and this newborn infant stopped seizures. The following year he then patented with a colleague his very first medicinal cannabis preparation, which then went on the market.
On the preparations of Indian hemp, ganja, cannabis indica, and that's not the way he tells the story of how he discovers it. The way he tells the story is he goes about it in this very considered scientific manner, and this is why I suspect it's true. It's the way you'd expect a man of science like him to go about it, in that to begin with he's experimenting on animals. He begins with animal experiments, then from that he goes on to hopeless cases, people who are going to die. So he experiments on a man with rabies. What he discovers is that cannabis has the power to suppress the convulsions of rabies, and that's astonishing. That's what astonishes him most, because rabies, as I said, it's the most horrible death in the world. He doesn't describe it, but at one stage in his description he talks about how the guy goes into convulsions, and he says that even though I have the normal, even though I'm a surgeon, and I'm just used to cutting people up and doing all sorts of things like that, I could not bear to watch the convulsions of rabies.
Cannabis helps reduce.
Well, cannabis stops them.
It actually helps. It stops the convulsions.
It stops the convulsions of rabies.
So now we fast forward back to Australia. Shaughnessy and his thousands of other colleagues have all got products all around Australia for medicinal cannabis.
And the 1842 guy is probably J. Collis Brown, sort of. Chlorodyne. Well, the next sort of stage in the sort of cannabis medicine story is someone decides, wouldn't it be a great idea if we combine opium and cannabis?
A good idea.
I know.
I like that.
And so do a lot of other people. And so they get this medicine called chlorodyne, which is sort of a tincture of cannabis topped up with morphine. And it becomes the big medicine of the British Empire. Like it's sort of, there's lots of imitators of it, chlorodyne. J. Collis Brown even sort of sues people. Everyone's got their own sort of chlorodyne, and all they are is just cannabis tinctures reinforced with morphine, and some don't even have the cannabis tinctures, they just have a bit of morphine. So everyone has them, and he sort of starts suing people because they're claiming to use the name chlorodyne, and it is really the biggest medicine at that time. Like it's the most popular medicine in Australia, and who could be surprised about that? Yeah, like it's. I think he describes it as 6 grams of black Nepalese hash in each bottle, topped up with morphine. Yes, well, I'll double that.
Sounds nice. And also there's the Canadonna. Have you heard of that one?
Oh yeah, Canadonna, yeah. Canadonna's
made for Australia.
Made for Australia. Combination of belladonna and cannabis. I think it's mainly belladonna, 96%, 4% cannabis. But it's to be used for both asthma and epilepsy, I think, is it? It's certainly used for
my knowledge of that one is it's actually used for asthma.
Is it? Yeah.
To be used in an acute crisis of asthma, not just as a chronic inhalant. When you're actually having a real, I can't breathe, that's the time you've got to grab your Canadonna joint, I suppose, if you want to call it that, with the belladonna in it, and puff away.
Yeah.
And apparently the belladonna causes bronchodilation, so it actually eases your symptoms. And so does the cannabis. It also causes bronchodilation.
Yeah, because belladonna means beautiful lady, and it was used to sort of make the pupil.
He gets a kiss there for that. I'm a beautiful lady. I know. Carry on.
Um, and
Made you blush
I'm
today.
such a charmer. I can't help it.
I've got big pupils from the belladonna.
Yeah, so that's what it was mainly used for in Roman medicines. The Roman sort of women used to sort of make themselves more attractive by putting belladonna drops in their eyes, and it's obviously the same thing. It's a vasodilator.
Of course, we still use it today. The belladonna, deadly nightshade. I mean, we make atropine out of it now, and other sort of drugs.
Yeah. No,
for the heart rate. So what happened to the madness? I mean, why didn't we carry on? Why did we have to ban all this?
To summarise, the various theories on the causes of cannabis prohibition are: number one is it's a result of empire building by Harry Anslinger and the US Bureau of Narcotics, and is a large part of it. Like the cannabis prohibition is really pushed by the US Bureau of Narcotics and Harry Anslinger. Anslinger is behind the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs, which is what covers cannabis. It was a Single Convention of 1961, and the regulator bill that Di Natale is bringing in is to work in conjunction with that, because has been imposed more or less on the whole world by Anslinger via the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs. So, number one explanation for cannabis prohibition is empire building on the part of Harry Anslinger and the US Bureau of Prohibition.
So what empire was he building?
Well, his own personal empire, the US Bureau of Narcotics.
Right.
Which becomes the drug enforcement
So
agency,
he wanted to...
which becomes a huge sort of worldwide apparatus of prohibition enforcement.
So he wanted more funding in his department for prohibition, basically.
Yeah.
Catch more crooks. You've got an enemy number one.
Yeah. Second argument is it's a result of US racism, and that also fits in with the Anslinger empire building one, because Anslinger's an incredible racist, and Anslinger's, when he uses cannabis prohibition, is trying to get the jazz singers at the time. He's trying to get
the devil musicians.
Yeah, Louis Armstrong and all the jazz musicians he's after, and they are a great vector for the distribution of cannabis smoking in the US. Louis Armstrong, Louis did indeed always smoke joints, and he'd always give people joints, and he turned on quite a lot of people. In fact, he even wrote a part of an autobiography called Gauge, which was one of the words for drug cannabis is gauge in America in the 1930s. And he actually wrote an autobiography called Gauge, which was destroyed by his agent. So, I mean, Louis Armstrong,
an ambassador for cannabis,
was the greatest ambassador for cannabis in the early 20th century, and that was sort of suppressed as that particular document. And it'd be so great to rediscover it.
So no one's actually been able to resuscitate that one. Sadly.
Yeah, I sometimes have dreams of going over to America and looking for it, but no one's found it in America, so I don't think my chances are good.
So those poor old black people having sex with the white woman, it's not right, and of course cannabis gets the blame, and there's your picture.
Yeah, so that's the second explanation, it's racism. And again,
and the
you'd have to say, and the Mexicans, you'd have to say it's a pretty good explanation too, because the war on drugs as it's developed has targeted black Americans just way disproportionately. Do you want the third one?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, the third one is the Jack Herer conspiracy theory.
Alright.
And that Jack Herer conspiracy theory is also pretty good. It argues that, what's good about it is it argues that the renaming of cannabis indica as marijuana is the really decisive part of cannabis prohibition. And that's very true. Like, cannabis gets banned in Australia when it gets renamed as marijuana. So Herer's really right about that part, that everyone You know, like it wasn't as if cannabis indica caused any problems.
No.
It was just, and they couldn't prove that it caused any problems, so they invented this new drug called marijuana. And the first Australian Reefer Madness articles, or the first, or one of the first, is called New Drug That Maddens Victims, and it's about how there's this new drug marijuana which is being brought to Australia and which is turning everyone into sort of horrendous sort of sex fiends, and you know, they can be satisfied with, well, I mean obviously it's already having this effect on you. And it has the effect on both sexes, you know, it just doesn't affect men, it affects women as well.
Yeah.
And they demonise marijuana in that regard, and they get cannabis sativa banned. Well, they get cannabis sativa banned in Australia. That, it gets banned in Queensland as a result of the Noxious Weeds and Plants Act immediately after this sort of new drug that maddens victims sort of stuff comes in. So it doesn't get banned because of its effects, it gets banned because there's supposed to be something different, marijuana, which is a sort of evil sex drug. And it's described as an evil sex drug for about 25 years in Australia. You don't see the word marijuana without the qualifying phrase evil sex drug.
Yeah, well, I'm going to backtrack just 1 or 2 years. So the other thing we haven't touched on is that the other people that wanted cannabis banned were those people that had major investments in cotton and timber for the paper industry.
Yeah, this is part of the hemp, the Heroic
Who's the famous guy that goes behind that one?
Well, this is the Jack Heroic conspiracy theory.
Yeah, but there's some guy.
Well, it's Harry Anslinger.
Oh, isn't him?
But Anslinger is working for Mellon, one of the Mellons. The treasurer, the US treasurer at the time is, I think, Andrew Mellon, who's a banker. One of his nieces marries Anslinger, so he promotes Anslinger to be head of the Bureau of Narcotics. Now, the US Treasury, when he's US Treasurer, a really large part of it is the Bureau of Prohibition, because this is in the period when alcohol is prohibited in the US. So it's one of the major branches of US Treasury is the Bureau of Prohibition, and a smaller subsection of this giant bureaucracy is the Bureau of Narcotics. So Anslinger gets appointed by his wife's uncle to be head of this. It's a wonderful example of nepotism. And he then alcohol prohibition closes down, so they're out of a job. So he then invents marijuana prohibition.
Okay, well that's very interesting.
And, okay, so now to bring us back to Herer sort of claims, with considerable evidence, that the hemp industry is about to be revolutionised by the decorticator, a new machine which will get rid of the back-breaking work of hemp, of making hemp, because you've got to break the hemp to extract the fibres, and it is really difficult work, which is why they have slaves doing it.
So this machine's going to revolutionise the paper and fibre and industry of world.
Yeah, and it's very back-breaking work, which is why they're after colonies like the US. Well, the bankers at this stage have started to take over, the economy, and they have oil interests who bank with them, and they have chemical interests who bank with them. So they are invested in the oil industry. The banks are.
Because nylon's an oil product, isn't it? It is. Yeah, well, we don't want hemp to take over.
Yeah, so it's for those sorts of reasons you're starting to get that sort of military-industrial complex, because it's also, at this stage, oil has become the basis for empire. So by changing the name to marijuana and saying marijuana is hemp, you're able to accuse hemp of being this dangerous drug, which it just isn't. Hemp was never going to sort of be a dangerous drug. It has no history of being used as a drug.
And the name change probably could have been also, I mean, I would imagine a lot of people probably had their own cannabis medications at the time.
Yeah.
So no one wanted cannabis outlawed, the common person that is, because they needed it medicinally. So instead of to say we're going to outlaw cannabis, we'll outlaw marijuana instead, which is a different product altogether.
Yeah.
Women are getting raped by marijuana, their clothes ripped off. This one woman in Hawaii apparently took some marijuana and she was resuscitated a few days later, came to consciousness, and she had no explanation why her clothes were ripped. And the men were like wild animals and they have no idea what happened to that lady.
Yeah, yeah.
So these are the fabricated stories that send the colonialists into fear and worry, I suppose, especially if black people are having sex with the white ladies. That's just not on, is it?
Yeah, well, no, this is one
colonial point of view.
This is one of the major. Yeah, it's one of the major fears.
Fears.
And even in Australia, you know, like the first people arrested for marijuana are ship stewards. So, and they're black ship stewards in Australia. So there is this, and they actually get interrogated in court, and ask questions about this, and it's sort of implied that they're about to have sex with white women. So it was, it's in the sort of background of prohibition as well. It's certainly a sort of strong sexual jealousy component. So in the 60s in America, you have a period of dissent which is fueled by things like racism, the Vietnam War, and the fact that you've got a baby boom as a result of the Second World War. All those factors come in. The culture changes pretty drastically, and cannabis gets blamed for that. And cannabis is part of it, but so is the Vietnam War, so is American racism, etc. So it's part of the cannabis is part of the cultural mix of the 60s, and the 60s sees what looks as close as America's had to a revolution this century. I think that's probably true. Oh, last century. Last century, sorry.
We forgot, we're old people.
Yeah. So last century.
We were born in the last century.
Yeah.
Alright.
So it gets sort of blamed then, but there's also that's when the first attempt to legalise cannabis happens in that period. You have, and it's led by the Beatles, so it's got, people who are more popular than Jesus sort of leading it, and the Beatles the Beatles pay for an ad in, there's a thing called the Indica Bookshop in London at the time, which is producing a magazine called IT, International Times, and it's one of the hippie newspapers in swinging London. They organise a demonstration to legalise cannabis in 1967. They organise a big ad for the newspapers. The Beatles sign it, and 100 other sort of prominent people sign it. And that's the start of the cannabis legalisation movement, or the cannabis re-legalisation movement, as some people would probably
very interesting.
Insist on calling it. So that starts, and to hold that back, there are, Nixon attempts to hold it back by forming an inquiry called the Schaefer Inquiry, but it finds that it should be decriminalised, which he doesn't like, so he ignores it totally. The Ledane Commission in Canada more or less comes to the same conclusion, and these are always called commissions into the non-medical use of drugs, and this is something I'd like to stress, in that the single convention on narcotic drugs, which Anslinger imposes on the world, states specifically in the first line that it's meant to not applied for scientific or medical use of cannabis. So these are what they're attempting to ban, they say, is the non-medical use of drugs, and that's why the Schaefer Commission's called, inquiry into non-medical use of drugs, as is the Ledane Commission, and in Australia the Sackville Royal Commission is an inquiry into the non-medical use of drugs, and
they're finding they should be banned or not banned?
no, all of them more or less are for decriminalisation, all three of those.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. And the point I was making, though, is that there should never have been a ban on medical cannabis. It was not supposed to have happened. It was guaranteed not to have happened. And it's just part of the sort of creep of the drug laws.
Hang on, so let's just say it again. So the point you're making is that there shouldn't have been a ban on medical cannabis.
No, medical cannabis was supposed to be exempt.
Right. Can we blame the banning of medical cannabis on the pharmaceutical industry? I mean, there's a conflict of interest there. They want to sell you morphine and tablets. They don't want people taking cannabis.
Well, and that's the point about it being the non-medical use of drugs. The pharmaceutical industry are part of the single convention on narcotic drugs. Like Anslinger, as well as getting all the countries of the world into this, he has the pharmaceutical companies, and the pharmaceutical companies around the table when the single convention is being drawn up, and they make exemptions for the medical use of morphine and heroin. Pharmaceutical companies are in there, and they're setting up mechanisms to allow the legal production of the opiates for medicine when the single convention is being set up. But nothing is set up in that regard for cannabis because the pharmaceutical companies aren't interested in cannabis at that stage.
Because they can't make money out of it, probably.
Oh yeah, well, obviously.
Well, I mean, I don't know. What do I know?
Well,
I'll just wear the t-shirt.
Yeah, okay, you just wear the t-shirt. But no, I think that you could say that these are corporations which are dedicated to making large profits if they can.
So we got the 60s. I mean, wasn't there a big booming cash crop there just growing wild in the Hunter Valley or something?
Yeah, there is wild cannabis in Australia. It's a result of the experiments that Joseph Maiden did back in 1890 when they attempted to start a cannabis hemp industry in New South Wales in 1890. They get seeds from the US and they distribute it to 600 farms in New South Wales, and it's not successful. It's a bit of a drought going on, I think, at that stage, but it seems that various wild hemps escape from that, because the thing about cannabis sativa is that it's a very hardy plant and it very easily becomes a weed. A weed is a domesticated plant which has escaped. A wild plant is a plant before it gets domesticated, and then there's domesticated plants. So with cannabis you have that, wild plants, you have domesticated plants, and you have weeds. And there were all these weedy crops in New South Wales as a result of the experiment in the 1890s with Joseph Maiden.
64 kilometres of wild weedy plants, actually, not just a small patch.
Yeah, not just a small patch.
Yeah, 64 kilometres, that's like driving at 100 k's an hour for, I suppose, 40 minutes. That would be about 60 kilometres. Well, that's a lot.
From Singleton down to Maitland.
Crazy.
There's a stretch. And it's just that cannabis does spread easily down river valleys,
Hallelujah. And it took them something like 10 years to eradicate or something.
Yes, it did take them 10 years. I never discovered that file. There's got to be a file on that somewhere.
It's hidden.
Yeah, well, files get hidden. It's not always conspiracy.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's conspiracy, but only very rarely. It's just that there's a huge number of files that governments have got.
Well, I'll tell you what's interesting, is that this little story about the Hunter Valley 64 kilometres of wild cannabis. It was publicised on the radio, it was publicised in newspapers and on television, and yet Google can't find me one photograph. YouTube doesn't have one article on it.
Better than Google, a million times better than what were the other ones you named?
Google, YouTube, the library.
I laugh at their pathetic attempts to...
It's like there's been a conspiracy to hide it all out of history. And it looks like John found a picture.
Yeah, that's a picture.
John found a picture. There is proof. Fantastic. It's a picture of a young farmer, and he's gazing in an admirable way at his new crop, thinking, my God, I've hit the big jackpot. This is from...
I think it's from Maitland newspaper.
Maitland.
Maitland.
Yeah, Maitland, November the 16th, 1964. Well done. That would have been a hard find, surely.
Oh, well, I've got another picture. I've got cops standing in it, and another one. It's got an even better headline, because it's got one of those sort of evil sex drugs sort of headlines.
Oh my God.
Sex crop found in Hunter Valley or something.
Oh.
Some headline.
Oh,
like
John,
that.
please send that to me on an email, will you?
Well, I don't know where I've got it. But I've got it, somewhere in my files. My files are probably not as easy to access as Google.
Does Nimbin have a place in history at all, or do the hippies have anything to say, or do we just...
Well, it's a sort of... okay, well, you've got to sort of ask yourself, where is the drugs coming from?
It's coming from the Hunter Valley.
Yes, but at this stage, people are sort of taking the seeds from Hunter Valley crops and growing it, but a lot of it is coming in from Vietnam, because we've also got rest and recreation leave for US soldiers during the Vietnam War. To begin with, you have the Hunter Valley crop, then it's replaced with R&R boys bringing in all this cannabis from Vietnam, and then Australia withdraws from the Vietnam War. That sort of cuts that down. So you have to have people, but by then you've got an established cannabis market, so people start growing it in Australia. Hippies start growing it in Nimbin and around Mullumbimby and places like that. The Griffith Mafia begin, and the Newfoundland Bank begin growing it in Griffith. And so things like that happen. You get the development of an Australian drug cannabis industry from about 1972 onwards with the end of R&R, and it then sort of goes to the stage now where Australia is self-sufficient in cannabis, and Australia's been self-sufficient in drug cannabis for 3 decades or 4 decades, I don't know how long.
And so during the 70s and the 80s there was more and more prohibition, wasn't there, against cannabis, I suppose, since we're talking about cannabis.
Yeah, no, the cannabis issue gets conflated with the issue of the protest against the Vietnam War and with the opposition to conscription, that sort of cultural struggle between the new left and the old right. And cannabis becomes a symbol for that, so it becomes important to crack down on... By cracking down on cannabis, you crack down on the hippies. Just like in the US, where if you crack down on cannabis, you crack down on the blacks, because they're the main users. In Australia, if you crack down on cannabis, you crack down on the hippies and the alternative movement.
So it's a form of population control, controlling the opposition.
Yeah, it's a form of social control. It dates from the 60s, and it dates from the fact that people started objecting to being sent to places like Vietnam to kill gooks.
Alright. And then we have obviously the Fitzgerald inquiry, which...
Oh, there's heaps of inquiries, yeah. There's
puts an end to corruption, theoretically. Certainly puts the brakes on corruption.
What does that ball go past your stump? Well, yes, well, the corruption comes to to light as a consequence of that. But it's also mainly the murder of Donald Mackay in New South Wales, which is probably more important than the Fitzgerald inquiry, because the New South Wales and Griffith is the centre of the Australian drug trade in the 70s, and Donald Mackay plays an important role about informing about various drug crops at that time, including the biggest ever, the Collyambly crop, which is 375,000 plants.
It's huge. Yeah.
Well, too big for the Australian market in my analysis, but yeah.
Wow.
Okay, so and it's being done as a result of this sort of Pacific-wide drug market, which has come about as a result of R&R. Like, it's so the murder of Donald Mackay is really important, and it then leads to inquiries into the Nimbin Bank, which is set up. And the Nimbin Bank isn't just set up to run the drug trade in Australia, it's set up to run the drug trade in the world. The Nimbin Bank is the biggest criminal enterprise that's ever been in Australia. So it's bigger than Queensland, and it's a result of the murder of Donald Mackay that the drug trade in New South Wales gets closed down because of all the inquiries into the Donald Mackay murder. And it then moves up to Queensland and goes to the Afton Tableland. The Queensland police and the New South Wales police, just in cahoots the whole time. Like when their drug operation in New South Wales gets closed down, they move to North Queensland and set up a drug operation there. So you get a change in the drug trade in Australia as a result of the Mackay murder, and the change is it migrates to North Queensland. Normally, if you're a historian, you stay 30 years away from the present because the
sensitivities.
Oh no, it's just the files. The government
doesn't.
Yeah, the government doesn't open its archives till after 30 years.
So our journey finishes then within this 30-year barrier.
Yeah. No, we've hit. I hit the 30-year barrier. In fact, I surfed well beyond it because I've got the Fitzgerald inquiry to take me into that particular part of things.
So we're going to wrap it up here then.
Yep.
But I've got to just say one thing. We've just got to just say one thing quickly.
Yep.
We have totally not mentioned that John here is wearing a hemp suit.
Oh.
And that's important.
Yeah, I have. Wearing my hemp coat. This was in fact 25 or 30 years old. I got it from Andrew Catalaris when he was actually into cannabis clothing. Andrew was doing something called Cannabis Clothing Company, and he's got a little cannabis clothing company thing there which you can't see, but you can...
What does it say? Let me have a read of that. It says Cannabis Clothing Company.
Yeah, so he, at that stage he was getting licenses to grow hemp, and he had dreams of starting a cannabis hemp industry in Australia, but Andrew's dreams are forever crushed by cannabis prohibition.
Dr. Andrew
Catalaris.
Thank you very much, John. Okay. This was John Jiggens, and thank you very much. I'm absolutely pleased to have you come and talk to us today.
Well,
thanks. You are a knowledgeable man.
Thanks for that disco, Sista.
Thank you.